tend to say the language that Jesus used in speaking to disciples and the Pharisees, and who, through the recording of the gospel accounts, speaks to us in a translation, but the language he used was Aramaic. I want to say again, Aramaic was a fairly common person's language. It was the language that was spoken by Jesus. It was the language that his family spoke, his neighbors spoke. It was the language the disciples spoke. They didn't speak Greek. They didn't speak Egyptians' language. They didn't speak any of the languages of the Mediterranean. They spoke Aramaic. And the Aramaic was in some ways very simple. It's still being spoken in some parts of Syria yet today. The term for mourn, if you go back to the original word in Aramaic, has essentially two meanings. It makes reference to the person who's mourning. Blessed are those who mourn. So the those is the key word in mourn, because Jesus is thinking about all of these folks out there who are listening to him. There's a crowd of people, they've come to follow him, and they want to hear more about what he has to say. And then he says these words to them, which I think they can connect with because they have experienced a lot of disappointments, a lot of sufferings, and a lot of losses. You know, we all have losses, indeed, and indeed so did they. And so when he says to them, blessed are, or happy are, or enlightened are those who mourn, for they will be comforted by God. It's a way of saying there is a pathway through loss. There is a pathway through disappointment. There is a pathway through failure. There's a pathway through suffering and agonizing over the events of life that come to each of us. Now, you know, if we've been blessed by no failures and no disappointments and no losses, if you wait around a while, there's going to be one. It's just part of the reality of life. The other meaning is not only those, but the mourning process itself. What Jesus is saying is that it is a natural experience to, if you love and care and want to be in touch with how much the loss has meant to you, then you're going to mourn. You're going to feel sadness. You're going to feel a certain amount of pain. And sometimes there is even a sense of self-evaluation as to what it has meant to you to have that loss. I want to be very personal at this point. I can recall very much as a child, I was just a sophomore in high school, still a child in many ways. I developed an illness called chorea, and the whole right side of my body shook. I couldn't stop it. It was a nervous condition. It had been infected by, I suspect, a virus of some sort, and I shook. And my whole summer was filled with this shaking. It was just a horrible thing. And eventually, my immune system and the medications the doctors prescribed for me overcame that illness. So I lost my summer as a result of that. And I suppose I could have had this permanent shaking that that happens oftentimes to people through other forms of illness. It hadn't stopped. I mean, I grieved the fact that I lost my whole summer and all the activities and all the things that I could have been doing during the summer. My sophomore year of high school, around April or late April, I developed a very serious case of strep throat. The strep throat then turned into rheumatic fever, and it turned into a month-and-a-half long stay in the hospital. I was really one sick puppy, I'm told. I recovered through the advent of penicillin and sulfa. The sulfur and penicillin combination was able to overcome the rheumatic fever. I did end up with a heart murmur, which has not bothered me and has been part of my heartbeat for quite some time now. And again, in the hospital, I had gotten a scholarship to go to the University of Wisconsin. I was going to be a lawyer. I'd have been a good lawyer. I probably would have been an excellent lawyer. My sons joke with me and say you could have been a poor lawyer because you give away services. And I probably would have given a lot of services pro bono because that's who I am. So I ended up in the hospital for a month and a half. I ended up in bed at home for another month and a half, and I wasn't able to go to the University of Wisconsin to study pre-law. I mourned those losses. I can tell you, I felt depressed, I felt sad, I was overwhelmed by that illness. I was a youth, part of the Methodist Youth Fellowship, both in our local church, and I was part of the district United Methodist Church, and I was president of the district for a couple of years. One of my very best friends on the district board of directors, on his way to a meeting we were having, he was in the Sun Prairie area. His family owned a big cheese store in that area, and he was killed by a train in a train crossing that was poorly identified. The sadness was immense and intense, and I mourned the loss of this, my friend. But particularly, I was mindful of the fact that this was somebody my age who had died. And the uncertainty of life surely set into my thinking. Then we went to college, and Nancy and I were part of the Wesley Foundation, and we attended meetings on Sunday evenings. We would have a meal together, which we all would prepare. And we met at the Algoma Boulevard Methodist Church, and the minister there was just a wonderful guy. Three of the young people were part of our fellowship for 4 years. And after we had graduated, we learned of the suicide death of one of the girls who was really troubled, all kinds of struggle within her mind and in her spirit. And she ended her life. And shortly after that, the twins, brother and sister, both were killed in an automobile accident or cancer. I'm not remembering exactly the cause of their death. But there I am, a college student, graduated now. I'm in seminary, and I'm thinking about what that means that somebody, again, my age is dying. One more grief in my family. My brother was an alcoholic. He was a wonderful guy in so many ways, but he struggled with a lot of things in his mind. And Roger tried to still all of that turmoil with alcohol. That was his medication. But the medication eventually got to him. And after 3 or 4 hospitalizations, he died at the age of 42. Not only did I grieve the death of my brother, who was my defender, because he was always stronger than me and bigger than me, though younger than me. I also grieved the fact that I may not, in my mind, have done everything I could have to help him. It was a painful time for me. A painful time for me. So when I read this story about the grief, I can tell you I know grief. I've been grieving. I've been mourning losses. Oh, there are many more, of course, that are part of life. Our sons, again, have said to me, Irv, because they've always called me Irv, because you all call me Irv. Irv, what you do is redefine reality. And what I tell them is that no, that bottle is always half full. It is never half empty for me. I have this, I think, gift that has come as part of the life that I've experienced, that there is positive in every negative. There is something that can come from defeat. There is something that can come from loss. There is something that can come from failure. And engage that something, touch that something, embrace that something, and move on to the rest of one's life. So these two things come out, both those who grieve and the grief itself. And in some ways, though it may not seem possible in the midst of one's grieving or in the midst of one's mourning, that there is a possibility of being blessed or being happy or being enlightened. By the way, new research into the meaning of the word blessed in Aramaic comes up with some new words. Healthy are those who mourn, for they will receive comfort from their God. Healthy. Joyful are those, as indeed was said in one of the thoughts that came from Gilal Gibran. Indeed, the deeper your sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain. Now, that is particularly true if you have around you persons who know how to nurture and support you during your grief and during your mourning, whatever that may be. Being fired from a job, having an idea that was just great and it just didn't work, a business you started that failed rather quickly, your trust in someone that was destroyed by them and by your expectations of them, or the loss of somebody special in your life. When Dr. Henry Ash, who was the person who delivered two of our sons, Andrew and Tom, died of his own choice. It was such a horrifying experience for not only for me and for our church, where Dr. Ash was a member and attended frequently when he was not making house calls and doing really great things in the community. It was a time of significant mourning in the community. And as the minister of the Methodist Church back then in Minocqua, I would get calls from people in the community saying, if Dr. Ash could do that, I could do that too. I need to talk to you. So I ended up doing counseling with, I can't tell you how many people in the community who suddenly were gripped by their pain and their suffering and their concern in the midst of their grieving and in their mourning, the loss of this really special and unique person. I want to tell you that grieving needs people who will support you, nurture you. Sometimes you can get all you need in your family. Sometimes it's a neighbor. Sometimes it's someone you don't even know very well who comes to you and says, I hear you. I hear you. And that's all they say. Or they say something like, if you need me, call me. If there's something I can do for you, get in touch with me. So someone out of a sense of compassion. Compassion comes as a result of a person who says, I know that emotion, I know that feeling, I've been through it, I can be there for them without telling them how to respond and how to feel, but I can be there for them so they can ventilate, so they can share. Now, as Christians and as followers of Jesus, you know that what Jesus is saying is that one can be blessed. One can, in fact, be happy, joyful. One can indeed become enlightened. One can become healthy. One connect with the source of life. One can become connected to the one by grieving. And being blessed then by that God who not only encourages others to bless you and to be with you in that journey through the grieving and the loss, but to know that you have been comforted. Now, the interesting word in Hebrew is that comfort has to do with being fortified, strengthened, empowered. Jesus adds a little different touch, actually a significant different touch to the term comfort. In the Aramaic, it means something like putting salve on a wound. How that comforts you. Putting salve on a wound. That's what comfort is. Comfort is giving one hope, giving one a journey through the painful. 23rd Psalm says, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil. Why? Because God is with me. God is with me. That's what Jesus is saying. Comfort has to do with that balm that is a healing and nurturing salve, which brings health and wholeness, joy and hope. So while your heart may be filled with sorrow, maybe heart may be filled with sadness, maybe even for a moment your heart may be filled with anger and confusion, when that is gone in the process of grieving, and there is resolution to the losses, to the defeats, to the failures, to the experiences that you have that cause you to grieve and to mourn, there is room now for hope and joy and celebration, for God has been there with you throughout that experience. Blessed, happy, enlightened, healthy, hopeful, joyful are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Amen.